Hello there, my name is Mike Frazier. Glad to have you with me. So today we're going to do an instructional video on how to trim a horse. Now, I want this video to be in a way, if you are an experienced shoer, perhaps you can take some learnings away. If you're new to the trade, hopefully we can give you some inside tips and some instructions that will help you in your practice. So as you see here, we got a horse that's fully haired up, just coming out of winter, so this will be his first trim of the spring. You'll notice this horse has what's called a high-low syndrome. We've got one foot that is clubby and one foot that's underrun, or ran forward, if you will. Also, this horse suffers from what's called string halt. You'll notice this hind toe is stubbed off. That's because this horse has a hard time with its natural stride when bringing this foot forward, and that toe tends to drag on the ground. And you can see this other foot, well, it's just long. So Dusty is a quarter horse and part Arabian. So I think he's about a 50-50 mix. Now here's your quick tip. Always bring a buddy. Or if you find that your horse is struggling to stand still, maybe it's because their buddy's not close. So we've got Bronco here. Bronco's going to help Dusty stay nice and quiet for us. Now before I get into the video, I want to pass on a few things about tools. Your rasp. So I carry two rasps. One is my finishing rasp, and one is my leveling rasp. My leveling rasp is the one that is ideally the sharpest. It's the one that I use for leveling the hoof. This one I use for dressing the top side of the hoof, or the horn of the hoof. Don't underestimate the value of your tools. Early in my career, I used what I had. Money's tight, so you make do. But as soon as you can buy you a good set of quality tools, I recommend it. Not to promote any brand, so I'm not going to jump out there and say one brand's better than the other, but I have had a lot of luck with GE. And yes, they're expensive, but they hold up and last for a season. Plus, you can also have them sent in and remanufactured. Also, sharpness of a rasp. Extremely important. So let me pass on another little tip. I wish I would have known this a long time ago, perhaps when I first got started. When your rasp starts to get dull, you can sharpen it. Using a coarse buffing compound and a buffing pad. I'll demonstrate real quick how you can do that. Just simply apply, and I have found just working my rasp like so makes all the difference. And you'll know your rasp is sharp when you start to feel it drag more on the buffing will drag on the rasp. All right, shall we get to trimming? So one thing I like to pass on is consistency. Get in good habits. I always start with the same hoof, and I work my way around the horse the same way every time. Consistency, I think, in most things with life is extremely important. But when it comes to trimming the horse's hoof, being consistent so that you have the same outcome. And even something as simple as working your way around the horse the same, you'll notice that you develop the right habits that make you an efficient and accurate trimmer. All right, so I will start on his near side, and this is the foot that is a club foot. You'll notice we've got a fairly upright foot and some longer heels. So a couple things I want to point out real quick. It's important to understand this concept, weight bearing of a hoof. A horse will bear their weight through what's called the pillars of the hoof. They will bear it in the heels, on each side, and through the pillars. You'll notice this horse has a natural crack here in the quarter where it has chipped out on its own. A horse does not bear its weight in the quarters. This is nature's way of trimming that hoof. And you'll see this quarter's busted out, and here on the inside is also busted out. So my trimming, I approach it two ways. If I am trimming a horse to put a shoe on, I will have a little more aggressive of a trim, and I will trim flat. When I'm trimming a horse to go barefoot, I have to keep that in mind. This horse is going barefoot. They need more foot. And then I also trim it to set up for success. So in a way, it helps to keep itself maintained, and I'll demonstrate that in how I trim. But it's really important to understand that I approach trimming in two different fashions, whether I'm asking a horse to go barefoot or whether I'm putting a shoe on. Okay. Really important concept when it comes to horses' hooves. Toe length. How on earth do we make sure the toe lengths are the same? Often when I'm called to take a look at a horse, to examine a horse because they're lame or because there's some sort of a issue in their gait, their stride, something's off, one of the very first things that I look at, believe it or not, is toe length. Are their toes the same length? And often you can look, and by the eye you can tell whether one toe is longer than the other. I liken it to an athlete wearing two different size sneakers. Can you imagine running up and down a basketball court with two different size shoes on? Well, we ask a lot of these horses, and can you imagine trying to do it with two different size toe lengths? So, passed on to me early on, I like to measure their toe. It's a great, simple concept. This is by W. Brand. It's called the Hoof Evener. This little notch is designed to sit right in at the top of the cornet band. And if you look, you can slide this gauge down, and that little groove, little indent, will catch on top of the cornet band. And then you have your measurement here, and if you need to slide and adjust, you can do so. Okay. Now, this gives me a good idea on a starting point. So another principle that is important to pass along is the ideal length. I'm going to talk a lot in generalities and in principles because I have come to learn that there is no hard, fast rule when it comes to trimming a hoof or shoeing a hoof. About the time that you believe there's a hard, fast rule, if you're a professional, in comes the one that will break it, that will change your mind. So it's important to understand this. So this is a great rule of thumb, but it's not always 100%. Toe length should not be less than 3 inches. You'll find that the majority of the horses you work on, be it quarter horses, Arabs, Tennessee Walkers, are going to have a toe that ranges anywhere between 3 to 3.5 when trimmed. Excessively long like this foot you see is right about a 4-inch toe. Now obviously exceptions to the rules. Ponies, for example. Bronco, not a 3-inch toe. Draft horses, big breeds, are going to tend to have a bigger foot. Okay? So a good rule of thumb on the majority of the breeds is no less than 3 inches. All right, this foot has some really great established bars. You can see that they have grown out in what I believe is a protection of the foot. We've got a lot of excess frog. You can see right here, this is a good portion of developed frog. And what I'm doing is I am trimming away what nature was about ready to exfoliate. When I am trimming a horse to go barefoot, always take that in consideration. Only take out what you absolutely have to. Remember, you're better off to leave a little extra than to take a little too much. And here's another really important concept. If a horse is sound when it walks in the barn and lame when you're done, you did it wrong. I don't care what any book says. I don't care what a vet says. If the horse was sound when you started and lame when you're done, you did it wrong. That's when you need to go back to the drawing board. Now, important to remember, whether you're a professional that's been doing it 30 years or a rookie, nobody's perfect. The difference between a rookie and a professional is a professional is going to make less mistakes less often. But they still make mistakes. None of us are perfect. Okay. Good guiding principle. From the apex of the frog, you have about 1.5 inches that you'll be able to trim off. This foot is you can almost clearly see exactly where we need to trim. We're going to be conservative, These nippers are about 1.5 inches wide. They work as a great little measuring device from the apex to the toe. Now, you notice I am not trimming flat. If I was trimming this foot for a shoe, I would be flat. I'm trimming this foot to go barefoot. I'm going to leave a nice little rock to that toe. Imagine this foot breaking over. Imagine what a shoe looks like if put on that foot. That shoe will have a little bit of a break. Now when I get into the quarter, you can see I'm coming right to the quarter and I'm at a steeper angle. But you can see I finished right where nature had trimmed that foot already. I'm going to trim this bar back. I'm not trimming this bar below the sole plane. Now the heels. The heels is always one of those things. Look at the foot, gauge the sole plane, and ask yourself, how much of this heel needs to stay? What needs to be trimmed? Am I trimming below the frog that I just cleaned up? Am I trimming to the widest part? Again, I'm going to do what's called spiking the heels. See my natural angle? And I brought that heel right to the height that I want to be for this horse to go barefoot. Again, I'm going to trim this bar back. This heel is slightly taller. I'm going to do what I call spiking the heels. Now, we're going to take this toe and we're going to continue that along. And again, you'll see I come right out where nature had already trimmed that quarter. Now, if you notice, we've got a fair amount of flare in this toe. You can deal with this with a rasp. You can speed up your process with your nippers. I'll come and take an even steeper angle and do little nips all the way around. I have found this just saves me time rasping. Okay, now I want to point out something. You see, there is still some sole here that's ready to exfoliate or getting close to. I can come through here and pare all of this out. But one thing I want to point out, depending on where you are in the country, depending on what you're asking the horse to do, you may or may not want to take out the rest of this sole. You may or may not want to pare that out. Understand, often less is more. There are times when you should take this out. There are times that you need to leave it. That is the essence of trimming that is really hard to teach. Ask yourself, what's being asked of this horse? How much protection does this horse need? Is this a thick foot? Is there a lot of sole? Is this horse a pasture ornament? Or is this horse expected to go down a rocky trail as soon as you're done trimming? Okay, a lot of things come into play. Is this going to trap bacteria? Should it be removed because I'm worried about bacteria underneath there? All of those things are important to consider. For this horse, I'm going to opt to leave it. His bars were growing down. You notice I didn't trim those bars down past this point. And if you also notice, there's kind of a natural rim to this trim, almost as if I left the shoe on that foot. So we got plenty of heel, and we got a nice bevel all the way around that foot. Remember, this is the club foot. Okay. Now, understanding this is the club foot, there's not going to be as much dressing on the toe as there is on the other foot. But I'm going to ask this horse to back up just a little bit. Oh, a real subtle tip or trick. Right here about the knee is what's called a chestnut. It's a natural pressure point. By even asking a slight pinch, we'll ask that hoof to come up. If not, of course, you can always pinch on the back of the cannon bone here between the tendons, and that will help encourage them to bring the foot up. Okay, dressing the foot. Here's a really good gauge I like to use. Good rule of thumb is about the first 1.5 to 2 inches is what's called the true angle of the hoof. Now remember, there's no hard fast rules. Where this is a club foot, if I was to get to that true angle right there, we would probably take this toe too far back and we'd have a sensitive hoof. But that angle helps me to know how I should hold my rasp. My rasp is going to match that angle. Now I won't necessarily get the foot all the way back, and I won't necessarily remove all of the gap. But that will be the case on the other foot. You'll see that there won't be any gap. But my rasp is going to match that angle, and you'll notice my rasp marks will continue to climb as they work up this hoof. I'm not rocking my rasp, I'm not dubbing it off. I'm holding my rasp at that angle. And you'll see with each stroke, my rasp has climbed. And now from right here, you can kind of see that there's a little flare, bevel to the hoof. And once I get to where I'm happy with that transition, it's close, it looks normal for the hoof. Remember, if it looks right, it is right. Remember that. Now, I'm going to take that angle and I'm going to work it right around the hoof. Look, I'm not tilting, I'm not dubbing, it's the same angle. I'm using my whole rasp. I'm not doing short strokes, I'm not doing nice, long, consistent rasp. And I'm continuing that all the way around the hoof. Now you can see the angle changes, but look where my rasp marks are, staying the same. Now I'm going to continue that. You notice my angle, my rasp drops down, but I'm still holding it, that angle to the hoof. Now I'm going to continue it right around, just taking off any flares of the hoof. Now I'll flip my rasp over, use the smooth side, and remember I trimmed that hoof at almost a 45, a slight bevel. Now I'm going to take my rasp and I am just going to finish up that bevel. Nice and round, and I'm going to feel for any jagged points. You can see where the hoof tried to trim itself, or did. I'm going to smooth that up just a little bit. The idea is when this horse leaves the barn, we don't want the first thing to happen is this horse to step on a rock and bust out the hoof. Probably one of the bigger complaints that you'll hear from owners is as soon as the horse is done being trimmed, they step on a rock or they step on an uneven surface, and now all of a sudden they got a section of the hoof that's busted out. This trim, doing it this way, is going to help alleviate that. It's going to give to the ground, and by trimming this way, the hoof is going to maintain itself easier. Okay, now we're going to continue on to the other side. And you see my rasp doesn't change angles, less of a flare on this side. And I continue it right around. If I'm happy with where I'm at now, I take my smooth side at that angle and I follow it around. Now mind you, I have not dubbed this off. That's a common mistake. It seems like such a simple task, but this is one of those things that takes a lot of practice to get good at. So if you are just learning to rasp, be patient with yourself. It takes years. A good shoe or a good farrier makes it look really easy. Be patient with yourself. It will come. Now, you can do a lot of things that are purely cosmetic. You can get a sanding block. You can dress this up, make it look super pretty. You can use the fine side of your rasp. But I want to point something out. All of that's fine and well. But at that point, it's just cosmetic. Functionally, it does not benefit your horse. Look, appearance-wise, it looks great. But taking a rasp mark out or smoothing it up is just cosmetic. And there's nothing wrong with that. Okay? All right, now, for the sake of reference, let's measure this foot. Where are we at? Okay, so you see my little gauge. I'm going to put it right. If you kind of hold the hoof down at an angle, where do we fall? We're right about 3 3/8, just under 3 1/2. Okay. Now, if I was putting a shoe on this horse, He probably would have ended right at about 3 1/4, so an 1/8 of an inch shorter. Remember, an 1/8 of an inch when it comes to trimming is a lot. So is a 1/16 of an inch. We want to get it right. Now look at this. Isn't this interesting? This hoof is considerably bigger than the other one. What does that tell you? As a shoer, ask yourself these questions. Why on earth would that foot be so much bigger? Why is that one smaller? Maybe perhaps with this horse, this is his favorite front foot. Maybe when he's grazing in a pasture, the clubfoot is the one that's cocked behind him. I bet 9 out of 10 times you would find that that's the case with this horse. This foot is the one that bears the majority of his weight. It's how he's comfortable with standing. The reason being, I could only guess. Perhaps it has to do with conformation. Perhaps he's got a back issue. Couldn't tell you. But for him, he prefers this foot. All right. Well, let's jump right in on this trim. You notice when I ask this foot up, I start asking for this foot here. I'll bring my hand down, and I'm not even applying much pressure. This horse knows that I'm going to be asking for that foot, and you can see that he gives it right up. All right. Look at all this. We've got a sheared off heel here. It's tried to trim itself. We've got some really overgrown bars. You can see those are trapping bacteria underneath. Okay. We got the sulcus of the frog is overgrown. Center sulcus on this is actually cleaned out, looking well. Okay. Now, nothing wrong with using a knife, right? Good practice. They make a lot of great knives. You can come and trim this up, be it a double hoop knife. I have found that for me, I can get carried away with my knife and often take away more than I care to. Remember, we want to leave as much as possible without taking too much. So this is kind of interesting. You see bacteria's gotten in and is causing a separation on this. So where that's separated, I'm going to go ahead and trim that out because this is just a source that's going to trap dirt and bacteria. It's not live tissue here. So I'm going to trim that out and open that up so that all dirt and bacteria is less likely to be trapped. I'm going to use my knife because I can feel that my nippers didn't allow me to get that sulcus completely trimmed out, and there's a little bit of a pocket up underneath that frog. So wanted to make sure we got that good and clean. And trim the height of this frog just a little. I could tell it's just a little overgrown here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and these bars. You can look, I'm just lifting that up. You can see how that just wants to flake away. Again, wants to flake away. All right, and if you look look at my nippers, just kind of running my nippers across there. It's exfoliating this foot, almost pointing out exactly where we need to trim. All right. Now, remember what I said about being able to read the sole. A little bit of a callus developed here. I'm not going to go through and completely pare this foot out. This horse lives in a very rocky ground. We've got a lot of ice around still. So I'm going to be very careful about preserving this sole. Now, here's a concept that's really hard to teach. It's really hard to demonstrate because of the angles, but I'm going to attempt it here. This helps you to read the sole plane. From the buttress of the frog in the sulcus to the apex is a natural angle. And if I lay this in here, you can kind of see that it's deep at the buttress and much more shallow at the apex. Now, if I was to take an imaginary line and follow that through the hoof to the point, where does that come out at? Now, this is a guiding principle because it doesn't always hold true, especially with club feet. But on the majority of the horses you'll find, you do not want to trim below that angle. Again, from the buttress to the apex if this wasn't on this toe, where would that line come out if I drew that through the hoof? You can see it's going to come out ideally where I trim. And that's where I'm going to shoot. Now, something else. Why don't we take a look at this toe length? And here's what I like about this gauge, folks. A good carpenter measures. A good carpenter also has a good eye. But they measure to be exact. And that's what I'm trying to portray, is we want to be exact. We want to set these horses up for success. And in my opinion, 1/8 of an inch is a lot when it comes to a horse's hoof and the toe length. We want to be within that 1/16 of an inch or less. Ideally, we're exact. Be it a clubfoot or not, I want that length to be the same. So as you can see, we're getting started. We're right about a 4-inch toe. Okay? So let's see where we end up. Remember, a good rule of thumb, about 1.5 inches. These nippers work as a great measuring device. That's where I'm going to take my initial nip. Now, always remember, you're better off to be conservative if you're not certain. You could always take more hoof. It's really hard to add hoof. Okay, so I'm going to continue that. And I'm thinking to myself, I want to leave kind of a natural rim on this foot. So you can see I'm starting as I come into these quarters. Remember, a horse doesn't bear their weight in the quarters. My hip nippers are a much steeper angle. And I am trimming out all of that nature was trying to break off. And you can see nature here really was doing a pretty good number on this hoof. But you can see where my trim came out at, right where that break was. Now I'm going to trim this bar back. I'm going to be careful not to trim it below the plane of that foot. And you can see this heel right here at the end of my fingertips. You'll see that heel makes a little transition. I'm going to spike that heel right there. Now you can see I've got plenty of heel above my frog. I got plenty of heel protecting my bulbs. Consistent trim all the way around. Look at the flare in that toe. Okay, so we'll do the same on this side. Think to yourself, natural rim. But remember, in the quarter, you can almost go right down to the sole. Look at the transition here in this hoof. See how we're growing down, and then from this point it transitions and starts growing forward. You could even see the stress that's caused on this hoof. Now if I was to look, that point right there is at the same point on the other side of the hoof that I already trimmed. So my nippers are going to follow to that point. And if I look down my hoof, this one's just a hair tall. I'm going to take just a smidge off, but there we go. Now I'm going to do my cleanup nips. This will save me on some rasping. Again, steeper angle to the foot, almost at a 90, and I am just nipping that excess flare on that foot. Okay, same thing on this side. This is just to save you some rasping. You can certainly rasp that away, and that's fine too. Now look, we kind of have a natural rim. My heels are brought back. This heel's a little ran forward. But when I look, consistent with my bulbs, this foot is now balanced, even though this heel appears to be longer. It's because this one is growing forward and this one is growing down. But we're now even. Okay, now let's dress this foot. I should point out, it's important when you're trimming the foot to take that time and assess for soft spots, abscesses, thrush. Treat them while you can, while you have that foot up. There's all sorts of ointments that you can apply. I really like Jim Rickens. It's extremely expensive. A few drops goes a long ways. But I have found that because it's iodine based and has a lot of other pretty potent ingredients, it works really well with treating thrush. I've also found that it helps if you have a fairly soft sole. If you can push on the sole and it gives to your thumb pressure, that's a soft sole. And I've also found that adding some of that Jim Brickens to the sole will help harden, toughen that foot. All right. Now, if you notice, this foot doesn't have as big of a wallow, a dish if you will, but you can see we're definitely flared still. So, just like the other foot, now look, I've got my knee behind, adding as extra support. Because as I start to push, yes, I'm letting that rasp glide across the hoof. Remember, I told you this foot, when I was done rasping, there wasn't going to be any dish left, unlike the club foot. So I've taken that 1.5 to 2 inches. I've used that angle. Now that's my guide for the rest of the toe, and I will follow that around the hoof on each side. You notice my rasp angle changes. I pull it back. I come clear through the back of the heels. Important to note, I am only addressing the flare. I'm not taking off more than I need. Now I flip my rasp over to the smooth side. I finish that little bevel on that foot. I clean that up just a little bit. You notice it's not overly aggressive. Smooth side of my rasp. Makes that look for a pretty finish. So I'm going to take that around to the other side. There we go. And as I come into the quarter, you'll notice my rasp changes. It doesn't change angle or pitch, but I change how I follow that rasp back through the hoof. Okay. Good. Feel for any rough, coarse edges. Make sure it's a nice, smooth, consistent rasp. Remember, we're trying to set this horse up for success. This hoof horse up for success. We don't want any edges that are going to catch on a rock and bust out the minute this horse goes down the trail. Okay. I'm happy with that. Now, let's see how I did. How close are these toes? By my eye, it looks like they're close, but it almost seems like this hoof that was bigger was slightly longer. But it could be deceiving. So let's check. Okay, remember, this will catch on the cornet band. Right here, you can feel there's a little indent. This is going to catch right on that. And I'm going to slide that up. And if you look at the break and where that hoof is finished, we're the same. No need to change. Now, I could always take my rasp and clean this up a little bit. I've left a lot of this sole intentionally. I haven't gone out of my way to pare it out. Remember, we're still in big and icy ground, and then it turns right to rock where I'm at. This horse needs a lot of foot. If this horse was a pasture pet, I'd probably clean the sole out more, just to alleviate the chance of catching bacteria. But this horse needs all the foot he can get. I would say, I don't know, probably 7 out of 10 times that I'm asked to look at a horse that has become lame, the culprit is over-trimmed. The culprit is too much hoof knife. The sole's now soft. Remember, leave plenty of foot for what the horse is being asked to do. All right, now we're going to tackle these hind feet. Remember, this is the foot that this horse suffers from being string hauled. You notice that toe is naturally really kind of dubbed itself off, so I want to take that into consideration when trimming this foot. All right. Again, notice, fortunately this is a well-broke horse. When you're picking up feet, good rule of thumb, keep your hind end to the horse, okay? start asking up here. If you were to get kicked for whatever reason, your body can give a lot easier like this than like this. You'll hyperextend the leg, you'll bust a knee. Ask with your hip to the horse, start up high. And often, in doing so, before I ever get there, you know, that horse, if it's not already picked up, it's usually close to. Another real important concept when it comes to trimming. The lower and closer you can keep the hoof to the horse's body, to its other leg, the more comfortable the horse is. Yeah, as a shoer, you're going to be more uncomfortable. But the lower and closer you can keep this leg to the other, the less you're going to fight the horse. So I give him a chance to stretch out a little bit, and then I ask him into my lap. All right. You see we got plenty of mud going on here, and we got a lot of what's called false sole. This is going to be a great demonstration to show. Looks like we got the sole here, we can trim here, but you'll see this false sole, just simply lifting it, you see it's already developed underneath. And this bar is going to pick right out, and you can see false sole on each side. A little bit of a callus right here on this foot. And you see that callus just really easily picked off. But you see we still have a pretty prominent callus to this foot. And if I judge that angle like I showed you, would I be trimming below that angle if I trim this off? Can I leave this and trim the flare of that toe? If that's the case, I want to leave this. I want to leave that protection. Now look, my knife, I'm just real carefully picking at this foot, and you can see what's ready to exfoliate comes right out. Looks like there's a little bit of a gap here, so I'm probably going to go ahead and trim that out. But I'm going to leave this if I can. Okay, we'll clean up the frog. The intent of cleaning the frog like this is so that dirt and bacteria doesn't get trapped. Remember? Same here. Okay, again, it's real easy to over trim, especially frogs. We always want them to look pretty. I'm a second generation shoer, so really I have to give my credit where credit's due to my father, who taught me a lot of these guiding principles when it comes to shoeing and trimming. But, you know, less is more. He calls it the bar of soap mentality. In our mind, we think this frog is supposed to look a certain way. And so we'll trim it and we'll make it all look nice and pretty. When we fail to take into consideration, what does the horse need to be comfortable? What the horse needs to be comfortable is more important than what it needs to look to be pretty to the eye. So remember that. Only take away what's necessary. Okay? All right, remember that 1.5 inches. You can see. Now remember that too is a guiding principle. It might be slightly less than 1.5 inches. It might be slightly more. But that's going to be a really close range. But you can see I'm going to dive in right behind that callus. And I'm going to trim it like I did my front. Not quite a 45-degree angle. And as I come to my quarters, remember my quarters don't bear weight. I'm going to trim it at a much steeper angle, closer to the sole. And as I come to my heel, look at this. Barely taking any heel. This heel's a little lower. I'm going to trim this one down to match so that we have a medial lateral balance. Okay, because I'm not going to take much of this heel. This heel's still just a little tall. All right. Continue this foot around the other way. Again, as I come into the quarter, you can see where nature trimmed that. My nippers come right out where it already broke off. Heel length. This heel's tall enough. I got a little flare here on the end. I'm going to take that flare. Notice, I didn't trim the height of this heel. I didn't trim the depth. Okay. All right, that little bit of sole I'm going to go ahead and kind of pick it out where he's going to want to trap bacteria. Clean that up just a little bit more. Again, only taking what I have to. He's getting a little tight on this foot, so I'm going to give him a break. And I'm going to go right back to trimming that toe, which will save some rasping. You can see the flare, how thick that toe is in front of the white line of the foot. All right. Maybe it wasn't the horse that needed a break. Maybe it was me. Okay, you can see all the flare. I'm going to net almost at a 45, still leaving plenty of foot. You see, I'm only taking about half of what was there. And as I come to the quarter, hardly any, just a super tiny nip. Again, same thing here, hardly any. All right. So you notice the quarters are trimmed out, are shallower. We left plenty of sole across the toe. Our heels are even. Didn't even trim the height of this heel. Okay, now we're ready to bring the foot forward. Good practice. You know, if you don't have to set the foot down to move around, that's one less step, less work you have to do. This horse is already anticipating that leg coming up. Here's a really simple trick, and it's important to know. Sometimes, if you're having a hard time getting the horse's leg to come forward, remember he's straight, and so this leg already struggles with proper movement, with coming forward. Okay, we're really bound up here on the back side. So, as I ask this foot forward, I'm going to come past my stand and back to it. Okay, I'm going to come past and back to it. I just don't go to it. Okay, past and back. All right. Now, if you look, I've got more flare here than I do here. Remember that angle? Look, this is fairly clean, fairly straight. This is not so much. Okay. So I'm gonna definitely address that flare. So my toe, let's start at my toe. Remember, my angle's not changing. I'm following the pitch of that first 1.5 inches, 2 inches. And look at my rasp marks climb. Look, within a few strokes, I'm already there. I've already accomplished what I needed to. I'm going to follow that around. This inside of this hoof, the medial side, is very straight up and down. So very little rasping that needs to occur. There. Now that's not the case on this toe. So I'm going to continue that. And you see as I get to that toe, quite a bit more rasping. But I'm not changing the angle. I'm not dubbing it off. I'm simply continuing right around. But as I get into the quarters, I'm just addressing the flare to that hoof. I'm not taking any more. So I'm going to make another pass to clean it up. I'm going to take the smooth side of my rasp, round that foot up. There we go. All right. I'm going to feel for some coarse edges. I had a little back here. Smooth that quarter up. Feel back here. Okay. Feels consistent. Now let's set the foot down. And for the sake of it, let's measure this toe. Let's see how close we are. There are instances I have found where you might not always be the same length as your fronts than your hinds. I would say it's more important for your front feet to be the same and your hind feet to be the same, even though they might be different lengths, so long as they're the same. For example, if you're shoeing a horse, you might only shoe the fronts, not the hinds. So the lengths technically are different then for what meets the ground, but they travel fine. Now, if you were to go and mix that up, that's when you'd run into issues. But more often than not, you'll find that the toe length will be the same. The angle's different because it's a hind foot, but it will be the same length. All right, so we'll go ahead and pick this foot up. Okay, we're gonna run this down. This fetlock will catch it right on the cornet band, and you can see this hind foot is slightly shorter than his fronts. I'm coming in at right about 3 1/4, so about 1/8 of an inch shorter. Now remind you, this also is the foot that's string halt. It looks like it's a little bit smaller of a foot than his other, which makes sense because he bears more weight more often on that other foot. So you can see that other foot has more flare, so it'll be important for us to address that. And if we can get it to match this foot, that would be great. But remember, principles are not always or never. Because this horse has a known lameness, a known issue, that can definitely be a cause for a foot to be smaller and not necessarily trim out to be the same as the other. So let's see how we end up on the other foot. So you'll notice this is my natural approach. I trim the 2 front feet and then I work my way around. And we'll go ahead, I'll have you step his hind end to me if you would. Give us a little more clearance from that post. Perfect, thank you. Again, when asking to pick up that foot, remember, start asking up here. You can see he's already anticipating it. He's got his foot cocked. He's all but picked it up for me. This is a really nice horse to work on. And as those of you know that are in the trade, life would be wonderful if every horse was this nice to work on. He's not heavy. He's not bearing his weight down onto my legs, into my hips. Yeah, look at this. This horse has a lot less heel on this foot. Hardly any heel here. Slightly more heel on this here. See that? I'm going to pare that out. I can tell that was just trapping bacteria. Clean this up. A really good point to do is just take the time to clean the hoof. Not only does it allow you to check for abscesses, check for soft spots in the hoofs, corns, things in that nature, but it also saves your nippers. If you get the rocks out, then you don't end up with nicks in your nippers. And they'll just last a lot longer. I can't tell you how important it is to have a good pair of sharp nippers and good tools. Okay, you can see this frog is really pretty all by itself. There's a little bit I can trim here. I can open up the sulcus a little bit on each side. I'm just going to do that with my nipper, like so. All right, a little bit here towards the apex. And I believe that is well enough. I'm going to leave well enough alone there. All right. Clean these bars up. You can notice I'm just trimming where the bar kind of naturally wanted to bring itself off. I'm not digging down into the sole plane at all. All right. And this bar, just following it back to the heel, not trying to take too much off. Just kind of clean that up. Now, back to that angle. Remember, from the buttress to the apex. You can see this foot's a little more set in. Notice that apex sits down lower. The buttress sits down lower on this foot than it did that foot. Where does that angle come out at? Where this sits down lower. That angle's down here a lot lower than this point. It's down in here. There's more room to trim on this foot than there was on that foot. Understanding, being able to read that will help you to be able to read sole plane and know where to trim. Case in point, let's measure this toe. This foot is almost 4 1/8 inches long. Longer than that one to begin with. More foot to trim. I could read that, I could see that by reading that sole plane. Okay, so again, I'm going to come back into this foot right about my 1.5 inch mark, but a little bit more, and I'm going to take a little bit bigger bite because I know there's more foot to bring back. All right, look at all that flare in that toe. And I'm going to continue that
By the way, that cranking, that's hard on their leg. And try to be careful when you're doing that. Now you can see, I'm gonna continue out, and right where this quarter was already broke, that's right about where my nippers are gonna finish. See that little bit of a flare on that heel? Look, I'm at a 45 to that hoof. I did not trim the height of that heel at all, but my trim comes right to it. Okay, I'm gonna continue this around. Again, as I get to my heel, remember this heel is slightly taller, but not much. Look, the height of my heels now are the same. And I just came in here and barely took some off the height. Look at that big flare in that toe. So I'm gonna go and clean up that toe with my nippers. I'm at a 45 to the hoof. Okay. As I get to the quarters, you can see there's hardly any flare in the quarters on this foot. Really pretty clean. Now, before I've even dressed the foot, where did I fall? All right, you'll notice that rock ended. I took off my little gauge on the end here. Put this back on so you can see a little bit better. But where did I fall? So see my foot, yes, I'm a little taller here, but where did my trim end on this foot? Okay, if I was to look down this foot, all right, I'm coming in right about 3 1/8, but if you look down a little bit lower, you can see I'm trimmed down into that almost to 3 1/4. So I haven't dressed this foot. When I do, that'll bring that toe back even more. All right, so you know we had a little bit more flare on this foot than the other, because he naturally squared off the other foot. Now you see we got a little bit of dish on this foot. He's tight on this leg, I think because that other leg bothers him a little bit. So I'm going to come past and back. He really tightened up on this foot. So I'm not going to try and adjust him too much. If he's comfortable, I'm going to work with it. Remember that first 1.5 inches, my rasp matched that angle. Start at the toe. See those rasp marks climb? Okay. Now I'm going to finish that around. I'm just taking off the flare. Okay, smooth side my rasp. I'm going to continue that to the other side. Let them adjust. Good. Get that foot back up. You can see that little bit of flare here on the inside. Again, just addressing the flare. Okay, my smooth side of my rasp, I'm going to clean that up, following the angle that I trimmed. I'm going to feel those nice and consistent. All right, smooth side, take out some of the deeper rasp marks, and we'll go ahead and put his foot down. Okay, overall, for the most part, I say he cleaned up fairly well. Fairly consistent. A little more of a rock on this toe than the other, but we're trying to get him as close to possible as possible. That's not always going to be the case. When you have lameness issues, in a perfect world, they'd be identical. But as you can see in this case, they're not, and that's okay. They're really close. But for the sake of checking toe lengths and heels, I'm going to measure, and you can see right there, 3 1/4. I'll put this right on 3 1/4. Look, after I'm done rasping, look where that ended. And you see, same spot. So our toes are the same. Really happy with that. Slightly shorter than our fronts.
but our fronts are the same, our hinds are the same. Okay. Now, as you can tell by the sweat on my forehead, here's something that is really important to know about trimming. If it was easy to do, everyone would do it. There's going to be a critic on every corner. Very few of us actually do it. So if you're getting under a horse and you're trimming, you're already miles ahead of those that are critics. You're going to make mistakes. It's going to happen. But remember, I don't care what a book says. I don't care what a vet says. If a horse is sound when you started, lamed when you finished, you did something wrong. Take a step back. Think about your approach. What do you need to change for next time? Remember those guiding principles, right? Think about the horse. What is the horse being asked to do? You're always better off to leave a little extra foot than to take a little too much. Okay? The toe should not be less than 3 inches. Remember, that's a principle, not a hard set rule. Obviously, it changes with the breed. But for the majority of the breeds, that is a very, very accurate statement. I've only come across a handful of cases on quarter horses, and they were smaller in stature where they were actually less than 3 inches. But very, very few out of thousands of horses. Okay, well, I sure appreciate your time. I've hoped I've been able to pass on some learnings that my father passed on to me that will set you up for success, whether you're a professional, whether you're trimming your own horses. And if you would like, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions. We'll leave information for you to get in touch with me and or to share with your friends. Again, I do this for love of the horse, right? Fortunate to work in a trade that my dad passed on, but I've gotten to the point in my career where I do it because I can give back. And this is me giving back to you. Hopefully you've been able to take something from the video. Thank you very much.